Okay, so the story is that we're discussing, today is Tu B'Shvat. So we're discussing what it says, Ki Adam Eitz Hasada. It's very, very beautiful sikha, very beautiful talk of the Rabbi. He says that man is like a tree of the field. So basically, if God himself says that we're like a tree of the field, then everything that exists in the universe really exists within the person. And the tree is an example of the person. So really, everything we need to know about ourselves, we can learn from a tree. So the first thing that we need to understand is that a tree that doesn't have roots will quite quickly fall over and die. And they say that if you stand for nothing, you fall for everything. And this is what we're seeing in the world today, that because there are many people that don't have roots, they haven't been brought up with God and with the Torah, so basically they're rootless. They don't have an ideology. They don't have a knowledge of right and wrong. And so therefore, anybody comes along and says to them, hey, this is the truth, the craziest ideas. I mean, there's nothing more basic than boy and girl. And yet the mind can accept any kind of reality because it's just it's like a video. You know, you can make a movie on anything. You could make any kind of image that you want. And so because people may not have any roots, they're not rooted in any tradition, and behind the whole, the Rabbi Rash, he once said that if you were, I mean, it's a little harsh thing to say, but it's a true thing. He said if you were to castrate all the maskilim, the intellectuals, they would abandon all of their philosophies, because all of their philosophies really are just giving themselves permission to be promiscuous. That's all it is. If you took away that charge, just like a guy, I don't know, I remember going out with a friend of mine. Once we went to the New York Public Library, and he could do research there. So he was doing research on why marijuana should be legal. And it happened to be, he was a guy that liked marijuana. So his research is biased to his desire. If he had no desire for marijuana, he wouldn't be interested in legalizing it, right? I don't care about marijuana. So to me, this subject is mute. It doesn't matter to me. Legalize. I mean, it's just not my subject. So the point is that a person that has a bias is not intellectual at all. But in order to make their bias acceptable, they come up with, and history shows that throughout history, and we're in this stage now in history, there are few periods of times that people actually succeeded in creating governments and creating structures that gave people freedom and gave people, freedom is a very big thing, because usually governments were tyrannical and they didn't give people freedom. But what did people do with that freedom? And that's the biggest question in life. And that's what the Rabbi Evan Yisrael Steinzel said, that Rabbi was the Rabbi of Mashiach. Why? Because Rabbi is teaching us how to live in good times. It's like not such a hard thing to say in bad times, wow, you guys need to repent, or it's like, oh, if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell or whatever. No. The question is, let's say everything is okay. The Torah really doesn't speak a lot about hell. Why? Because the Torah wants us to live on earth. It wants us to learn how to be a good person right here, right now. I was speaking with a guy yesterday, and so he's like now in Ojai, but he came from a Christian background, and the fear of God is very real to him. It's like, oh, he's so afraid. So, but in Judaism, we're not about fear. We're really about what's the right thing to do. It's not a question of am I going to be rewarded or punished. Let's see, all things are equal, right? I'm not going to get rewarded. I'm not going to get punished. Now what? So the question is not so much what is in it for me or what I'm going to lose. The question is much more, what is the truth? And that's what the Rambam says, the highest form of service of God is serving him because it is the right thing to do. That's what we're ultimately looking to do, serve out of truth. And so, unfortunately, what happens in societies is that it's very, very interesting. It's a very strong, they call it, sometimes I heard this term, like a social contract, right? We're all, let's say, religious. whether it's even Christianity, let's say the Americans, they were Puritans, and they had this, and it was that faith and that belief, okay, we got to, whatever, get married and have children and work and be good and kind and have a justice system. So that structure created the stabilization of the society. But once the society is stable, as I heard from a young man, he said like this, he says that hard times make good people make good times make weak people make bad times. And that's really what happens, is that, and it's not really the people are weak, but what it is, they're naive. They don't understand. The early founding fathers of America understood, and it's on the passport. It says, like, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And if you stop your vigilance, if you stop your protection of your borders, you stop your protection of your way of life, it's not long before that will be destroyed. And so really the only solution to life itself is the Rabbi, is God, is the Torah, which gives us clear guidelines and says, listen, buddy, I don't care who you are, where you are. Like the previous Rabbi said, there are two types of laws. There are laws that are man-made, and these are laws that, for example, when to cross the street, when not to cross the street. It depends on the street. Some streets you cross now, some streets later, highways, there are different streets. But there are other laws that are immutable laws, the laws of God. They never change. Who you are, where you are, when you are, it's all the same. Don't kill, don't kill. The Torah's laws are immutable laws. And only if we're founded and we're rooted in this immutability, and that's why the Rabbi said that the Germans, they were an example of a society that was very sophisticated, but they didn't have immutable laws. In fact, they were very into human ethics, and yet they became savages. Because if the laws are not founded in the Torah, 7 Noahide laws and 613 laws, it's just a matter of time before the human instinct will take over. And the human instinct is not stupid. It takes very sophisticated forms of philosophies and gender studies and things that are absolute garbage. And yet, it has this ability to create an entire false system just to justify its own self. And you see this with little children. Like little children will take a toy from someone else. They'll say, mine, right? In other words, they know that the toy belongs to them. So they come up with a justification. No, mine. This toy is really mine. No, it doesn't make any sense. But it doesn't have to make sense because it's the desire speaking. So the guy that's older, the guy's a professor, he's just better at creating a more sophisticated desire. And that fools people that don't have the intellectual capacity to say, they say, wow, the guy's a professor. He must know what he's talking about. No, he's just run by his libido and he doesn't know what he's talking about at all. And it's quite simple. And maybe he has some knowledge in one field, but doesn't give him knowledge in every field, right? Okay, so that's number one. Number one is the roots. So now to be rooted is a very real thing, which is that we need to basically know that we are created by Hashem. Everything in the universe is a creation of God. And everything in the universe plays a role in, I say history is his story. We're all playing a role in his story. However you cut it, we're playing a role. And so once you understand that, it changes everything. Why? Because the other way of looking at life is, okay, I exist, certain things give me pain, certain things give me pleasure. And I have a line which is harder than it is to find the truth, is to do the truth that you found. Why? Because there's certain existential pain, especially for an intellectual being, which we are, to not know why we exist. So it's existential. But once you figure it out, okay, there's a God and this is what he tells us, but to actually do what he tells you, that is a lot of effort. That's like 24/7. So that's like what I think is one of the most important things in life is convictions. Why? Because you could even love God, but do you have convictions? And that's what we're saying, doing the truth because it's the truth. Do you do it because it's the right thing to do? Because there's a deep part of us that's moral. We all have a moral part of us. But are we activating our morality? Because it's very easy, even spiritually, to say, okay, I found there's a God and this is what he wants from me. But like even today, myself, I woke up late. So what does that mean? I'm a little lazy. So did I really do the will of God? Not really. Okay, was I a terrible person? No. But the point is that Am I activating my convictions, doing the right thing, or is it like, okay, I enjoy God, I enjoy Judaism, it's the truth, da da da. So here we see this idea that a person really has to activate their convictions and say to themselves, okay, this is the truth, and this is what's going to bring Mashiach, and I want Mashiach, and I'm ready to go 100% for this goal, because I need Mashiach, and I can't live without Mashiach. And that's the kind of mentality that we have to have. And that's the foundation of life. That's where we're rooted in. We're rooted in the idea that there's a God, we're a creation, there's a mission. If we fulfill the mission, we get Mashiach. And if we don't fulfill the mission, we delay Mashiach. And that's the truth. And we all want Mashiach. We all want the perfect, beautiful world. So then the next thing of a tree is the tree has a trunk. We know the tree, right over here at Tzfat, we have a 2,000-year-old tree. Do you know that?
No.
In the Rehov Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem Street, there's a 2,000-year-old tree. So the olive tree. That tree was around at the time of the Beis HaMikdash. It's unbelievable to think about what that tree knows. So the tree, every year, it grows another ring. What does that teach us? It teaches us that growth is our inner world. We have an inner world, right? The roots are rooted in a different world, and that I like to think of a human being. When we say human beings like a tree, it's like an upside down tree, because a tree is rooted in the ground. That's where it's getting its nourishment. But we're rooted in heaven. That's where we're getting our nourishment. Now, interestingly, our eyes see the world upside down, and our brain switches it around. But be that as it may, we are actually rooted in Hashem. But our internal space, meaning my actual life, what am I doing? I'm always growing. And what is growth? Growth is a circle. Everything you're doing is a cycle. And this is a very famous principle of Kabbalah. It's called Aleph Beis Gimel, which means God has a vision. He decides, okay, today you're going to learn how to be, let's say a little bit more sensitive. So maybe somebody's going to offend you, and you're like, wow, that really hurt my feelings. I'm going to be nicer to other people, right? So everything we go through is this growth, and we have a ring. Now, when we're young, it's like the first growth is very big and it takes a lot of time, but eventually we reach the point of what's called Yelchu Machayal Chayil. We're able to just circle almost instantaneously. You're able to really grow very quickly because you're used to growth. And it's very important that the stage of Mashiach is infinite growth. Now, the other great thing about a tree is Tu B'Shvat, it's the new year for the fruit, is the tree has fruit. And in a way, this is the greatest gift, because you can be rooted in God and your purpose, and you could additionally grow. But if you're not giving, you haven't fulfilled the purpose of life. And it's only when you actually are sweet, and you take something sweet and you give it to someone else, you help someone else in some way, shape, or form, that the tree has really fulfilled its highest potential. And ironically, within the fruit is a seed. And this is something very deep that we have to understand. Because normally when we look at it and we think about helping somebody else, we don't realize the ramifications of what that does. Because imagine the reverse. Imagine there's somebody that nobody helped them. What's going to happen to that individual? Maybe they could die. Maybe they could die emotionally. Maybe they could become resentful. Maybe they could, from that resentment, become malicious, right? They can start a chain reaction of evil. But if you can go, and this is a very important concept of Chassidus, and this is why fruits are sweet. Chassidus teaches us a very, very important idea called Hamtakas Hadinim. And it says you have to be Mamtik Hadinim B'Sharsham, which means in simple English, you have to learn how to, and very much applies in marriage, you have to learn how to make a miserable person happy. And the only way you can make a miserable person happy is you have to deal with the source of their misery. And so why is the person miserable? So often the person is miserable because they feel, let's say, anxious. You have to deal with that. Okay, try to make them feel safe. Person could be miserable because they feel jealous, meaning, why should I feel anxious and you should feel happy, right? So misery always has a source. A human being by nature isn't miserable. We're not born miserable. In fact, we're born neutral. we basically have a potential for any emotion possible. Potential for joy, potential for misery. So when we understand this idea that misery needs to be alleviated, right? If a person's poor, like, what's the idea? The idea is that a person needs to be what is chesed? Chesed is give the person what he's lacking. A person lacks food, a person lacks this. In other words, we have to help people not be miserable, quite simple. And the irony is, if we don't do that, they'll come against us. It's just the way the world works, because there's jealousy in this world. And so if we overlook the sufferings of others, those sufferings will become contagious, because there's jealousy in the world. So once we understand that this role that we have in this world, which is really we're rooted in God, it's where our soul comes from. It's our constant life force. You know, the tree is always pulling the water, pulling the life from God, air, sunlight, is where God is feeding us all the time. And then we have the Torah, we have a mission, we have a purpose. You know, basically our internal world is constant growth, but our greatest gift to the world is the fruits that we give. And we should never underestimate these fruits. Why? Because in the fruit is a seed. And a seed has an infinite potential. Every single time we're nice to someone else, we're making a ripple in the entire universe. Because instead of one person being a little bit miserable, and that can have a negative ripple, we're adding joy, and that's a positive ripple. And that's why, if you look at the mitzvah of tzedakah, it's very important how we give tzedakah. Baal Shem Tov says if we give charity but we don't have compassion, it's like murder. He says that, we all know the famous thing that the Rambam says, that the highest form of tzedakah is actually just giving someone a job or a loan to establish themselves, or giving with a smile. These things, because ultimately it's about uplifting the other person, because misery is usually connected to a kind of self-hatred, which is connected to, a certain sense of a person not being able to care for themselves or take care. And so that's really what depression is, in a way. And so what is joy? Ironically, joy is like a sense of power, like, wow, I was able to do it, I succeeded, right? Joy, I won $1 million, I'm joyous, I managed this thing. So we have to understand that anybody that's in a position where they can't really care for themselves, or they're lacking, they have a certain element of misery. And our role in this world is giving joy, or helping. You have to always see what is the source of the misery and how do I overcome it. A person has to use their head. And if we can overcome somebody's misery, we didn't just make one little gift of a fruit. We actually, in that fruit is a seed. Because that person that becomes happy will help the next person, will help the next person, will help the next person. And that's why, if you think about what the Rebbe did, really, all the Rebbes, what they really did is they just provided joy. It just made us happy. And, everything was about, all the Chassidus is having a happy perspective. And so once we do that, we're able to really just be sources of light in what can be a dark space. And in that space of light, again, it's very simple. We're rooted in heaven, we're always growing, and we're always a source of light. And once we understand that about ourselves, and it doesn't mean you have to walk around with a big smile, but it just means you have to care. Anybody that cares is already spreading light, because what a lot of people feel is that nobody cares about them, right? Even if you can't help somebody, at least care, say, how's it going, what's happening, just compassion. And just that act itself, which we all have within us, but it's activating it, it's doing it, and taking responsibility that the other person's suffering is my business. And I have to try to alleviate that suffering. I'm going to do what I can. This will make a beautiful world. L'chaim v'levracha.